Hi everyone, I hope you guys are all having a great day. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to do a discussion on a book to movie adaptation, and I'm going to be talking about the book Mystic River and the movie Mystic River. The book was written in 2001 by Dennis Lehane, and the movie was produced. Is that the word? Anyway, the movie came out in 2003. So these are, I guess, backlisted. This is a backlist book, and the movie was, how many years ago is that? 15 years ago? Almost 16 years ago now? So this may be off most of your radar, but I read it for the first time in September, and then I watched the movie after that, and I really enjoyed it and wanted to talk a little bit about it. So I'm going to go into a little bit of a summary of the plot, and then I'm going to talk about some similarities and some differences. This will include spoilers, so if you haven't read the book or watched the movie and thriller crime stories are something that you're interested in, then I would definitely recommend stopping this video and going and reading it or watching it, and then just come back later and we can talk all about it. So I'll go ahead and get started. Mystic River starts when you are introduced with three boys who are playing in a street, and they live in a suburb of Boston, and they're playing in a street when this car comes up to them and stops them. And the boys think that this is two cops in the car. The cops are sort of harassing them, giving them a hard time, saying they shouldn't be out on this street. And the boys react in different ways. The first boy, Sean, lives on the street, and he's creeped out, but he just says he's going to go home because this is where he lives. The second boy, Jimmy, doesn't live on the street but lies and says he does live there and he's just going to go home. Jimmy has very strong gut instincts. He knows that something's not right, and he's going to lie to get out of the trouble that he foresees. The third boy, Dave, isn't as quick thinking, and he thinks he doesn't want to get in trouble. He doesn't want to lie because he's just very fearful and timid in this circumstance, and so he gets in the car. And then you find out later that those weren't cops, they're criminals, and they kidnap Dave and hold him basically in captivity for 4 days and sexually abuse him the whole time. After 4 days, he does escape and makes his way back to his home. And this event in their lives connects them as they grow older, but it also separates them. These three boys really aren't friends after this point anymore. Then the story jumps forward 25 years, and you are seeing these men now in their everyday lives, and they still live in Boston. Sean is a cop in Boston, and he has some personal problems of his own, but overall he is a successful cop. Jimmy has got into all kinds of trouble when he was in high school, and then he went to prison, but he has since gotten out of prison and is living a relatively calm life, and he runs a successful convenience store business in the neighborhood where they live. And then Jimmy is married to a woman named Annabeth. Annabeth's cousin is married to the third man, Dave. So the wife's name is Celeste, and she is married to that boy who was kidnapped and raped as a child. The story really kicks off when Jimmy's teenage daughter is found brutally murdered outside of a bar in Boston one night. And the rest of the story revolves around Sean the cop, trying to solve the crime, and Jimmy and his criminal family trying to solve the crime as well, and they go about it in different ways, and Jimmy and his family attempt to dole out their own form of justice, that they feel like the cops aren't going to come through, the cops aren't going to take care of this problem, so they do it themselves. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some similarities now. The most obvious similarity is that the premise and plot of both the book and the movie are the same. You've got the beginning where Dave is kidnapped and he escapes, and then it jumps ahead and Jimmy's daughter is murdered. The dialogue is also almost exactly the same. They took the dialogue almost word for word most of the time from Dennis Lehane's book. And I personally think that's a big plus, because Dennis Lehane does characterization very well, and you get to know each one of his characters and understand them in a very unique and interesting way, and that is definitely a strength of the movie as well. Also, the movie does a great job of portraying the mood in the story, especially the tension between each of the characters as they are trying to solve the crime. And they each have a little bit of skin in the game. Obviously, this is Jimmy's daughter, and he's going to do anything he can to avenge her. Dave is part of this family as well, but he has his own problems because Dave, the same night that Jimmy's daughter is murdered, Dave comes home very late at night, completely covered in blood. So you know that something happened to him that night, and it was traumatic, and that he lied about it, but you don't know what exactly has happened to him. Did he kill the daughter, or did he have some other traumatic event happen to him? And Sean, the cop, is trying to do a good job, trying to seek justice, and he has his own personal problems as well. So you're getting the mood and the tension between all of these characters that is portrayed so well in the book. It's also in the movie, and I really liked that the mood stayed the same throughout. And then also they had the same ending. If I'm going to assume at this point that you have read the book or watched the movie. Both the book and the movie have the same ending. Not just in who committed the crime, but who gets punished for the crime as well. So those are the similarities, and I want to talk about some differences now. The first difference that I noticed when I was watching the movie was that the movie does not really dive into the social classes of the three boys, which in the book added to the tension with them as boys and then as they are men as well. So in the book, Sean is middle class. His father is a manager at a factory, I think it was. Jimmy is much lower class. He lives in a poorer neighborhood, and his father is a factory worker. Okay, so you've got the tension between the two boys because their dads work at the same company, but one is a manager and one is an employee. And then Dave lives in the poor neighborhood as well, but he doesn't even have a dad. And his mom is a little crazy, to say the least. And the fact that he doesn't have a father and the fact that his mom is so insane really also adds tension between the boys as well. So you've got those dynamics that play a role in how they relate to one another. Also, in the scene at the beginning, you really get a good look at how the boys are responding. Sean really tries to play it by the straight and narrow, but the other boys sort of think that he has a chip on his shoulder because of his wealth, even though he's just middle class. They think that he's sort of protected from the world because of his wealth, because all he has to do is go in his own front door, and he's protected. Jimmy is a fighter, and he's going to do whatever he can to protect himself and his family. And you can see it even in that beginning scene. The two cops don't want to touch Jimmy. They can see it in his eyes that he would put up a huge fight. Whereas Dave, on the other hand, is a much weaker character than Jimmy. Also, something that I thought was interesting is that the location of the body is different in the book and the movie. In the book, the crime is committed. The girl is shot in her car, but she doesn't die, and she runs through a park. And the two boys who kill her chase her through the park, and then when they find her hidden in sort of a closet in the park, they shoot her. And so it's interesting because the depth of the crime, it's a completely senseless crime. They have no reason for committing it, and but they continue with it. Once they start it, they can't stop it. They chase her through the park, and then they shoot her again and kill her. And it's so senseless, and the fact that they kept going shows how it escalated, and they couldn't stop. They couldn't back down. And that is really examined in the book. Why would they do this? Whereas in the movie, she is shot and killed in her car, and it's just as senseless and heart-wrenching. And the same boys commit the crime, but because of the format of the movie and the location of the body, you don't get as big a picture of the senselessness of the crime. And obviously, I think there are probably several reasons why they decided to film it differently. I think the most obvious would be that, number one, the scenes in the book where they're trying to locate the body are extensive and it would take up a lot of time. Number two, the location of the body would be difficult to film, and it would also be incredibly gruesome to film, and perhaps they wanted to stay away from that, although I think the movie is still rated R, so it's violent to begin with. Another thing that was different between the book and the movie is the movie took out some peripheral characters, particularly the girl was dating a boy named Bobby, and he was a violent drug dealer basically in the neighborhood, and they took out those characters. For obvious reasons, I think that the movie needs to be more focused, because the book is, almost 500 pages long, so they naturally had to cut some things out so they could focus on the characters that are important in the story. The last big difference that I noticed and really want to talk about is the women in the book. Now, I've talked about the similarities. The dialogue is almost exactly the same. The mood is almost exactly the same. And the role of the women is exactly the same in the book and the movie. But watching the movie really helped develop my understanding, and it gave me a much deeper understanding of the women in this book. So the two main women are Annabeth, Jimmy's wife, and Celeste, Dave's wife. These two women are cousins. Annabeth's brothers are the Savage brothers, and they're this huge, violent family of criminals, and they dole out their own sense of justice. They basically run the neighborhood. And so Annabeth has quite a bit of their strength and authority as well, whereas Celeste, who is more of a peripheral character in their family, doesn't have that strength, and she doesn't really have that support, although she craves it. And you can see that in the actions that in her choices throughout the story. Celeste is also interesting because she views herself as weak until her husband comes home with blood all over him, and she jumps into action. She cleans his clothes, she cleans the sink, she makes sure that nobody will be able to connect this crime, whatever this crime was, with him. So she shows that immediate sense of action and that immediate strength, but then she begins to second guess herself when it comes out that Jimmy's daughter is dead and Jimmy's daughter is violently murdered. She realizes her husband was there that night. Her husband was at the bar. Her husband came home with blood all over him, and she makes the choice. Is she going to continue to protect her husband, or is she going to go to the cops and say that her husband came home at 3 in the morning with blood all over him the same night that girl was murdered? Her niece, the same night that her niece was murdered. So the book was mainly focused on the choices and actions of Dave and Jimmy, but the movie, in a subtle way, was able to focus in and sort of shed light, for me, on the women in the book too. And ultimately, the ending of this story hinges upon Celeste's choice. Celeste thinks that her husband has murdered Jimmy's daughter. So she goes to Jimmy and she tells him. And later in the story, Jimmy decides, yes, that's exactly what happened. And so he and his brothers-in-law take the law into their own hands. They take Dave down to the Mystic River and they kill him. And that is how they dole out their sense of justice. Only later in the end do you find out that Dave didn't touch Jimmy's daughter. Dave committed another crime in a moment of strength for him. He saw a boy selling himself on the streets, and he murdered the man who was abusing that boy. So he commits a violent crime of passion, and that for him was a moment of strength, because he is taking that abuse that he dealt with as a child, and he's putting those feelings into actions by protecting this boy who was selling himself and murdering the man who was abusing him. So Dave finally shows that element of strength, and his wife can't follow through with her own strength of character to protect her husband. Now, these are all, I'm not saying that you're showing strength in lying or murder, because I don't think that those things are good, but you can tell that the author has something to say on the topic as well. Where does strength lie? Does strength lie in your family? Should you put your effort into protecting your family and your husband? If my husband commits a crime, what do I do? These are questions that we all have to ask ourselves and decisions that we all have to make. Annabeth made her decision and stuck to it. She knows exactly who Jimmy is, and she finds strength in that. Celeste begins to defend and protect her husband, but she takes it back, and then her husband dies for it, even though he is innocent of the crime that he is murdered for. Does that make sense? You're gonna have to watch the movie. If you've watched the movie, you know what I'm talking about. So I really loved the role of the women in this book. I didn't pick up on it as much in the book as I do in the movie, because Laura Linney and Marcia Gay Harden do such a good job of portraying the strengths and weaknesses of these two women. And I just really enjoyed getting a more nuanced view of the characters in this story. So those are my main similarities and differences that I noticed between the book Mystic River and the movie. I really, really enjoyed both of them. I thought the book was well written, and I thought the movie was even better. So if you have read the book or watched the movie, I would love to hear your perspective on the similarities and differences. Which one did you like better? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks. Have a great day. Bye.